I want to welcome you today to the continuation of our focus on church culture and how to shape a healthy culture in your organization. We talked last time about some of the big ideas, key beliefs, some of the assumptions and mental framework that plays into how we build the culture of our churches. And so today we want to get a little bit more practical with you, talking about how you actually go about shaping the culture of your church. And we are loving this session because it's right where we are as leaders, and it's teaching us as we go back through it how important this area is. And it's one of those things that I need to continue to dial in as a leader to continue to give attention to.
Yeah, so these will help you evaluate and move forward. And every statement in here is what we're working on currently as well. So number one is this, to clearly communicate your vision and values. And I know it's very profound, but this is the statement, the principle to dive into now.
That's good, man. It was a combination of Portuguese. Yeah. Patrick Lencioni's book called The Advantage, in my opinion, is fantastic about this subject. He goes through, wrestling through your core values, creating some kind of one-pager that the team can operate on, and making sure that it's understood what's most important. And sometimes for us, I think we communicate these values and we talk about them and we think about it a lot, and it's easy to start to think that everybody's getting bored with it and people are being exhausted by it. But what I've seen in my own leadership and in our experience is that the more we communicate these, the more people sometimes are just getting it dialed in. Like we talk sometimes with the band feels exhausted with a song because they've played it 10 times, but the reason they've played it 10 times is because they had 3 rehearsals one week and 3 rehearsals the next week, and they've actually only played it 2 times. And by the time the band knows the song, the people, the band's sick of the song, the people are just finally getting used to the song. And the same is true with vision and values. Yeah. Sometimes we're sick of saying it, but it's just when we're sick of saying it that our people are actually starting to grab it.
Yep. So it's important to figure out how you're going to communicate it, right? So you're going to write it down, put it on one pager, you're going to make a poster for your staff and your team, you're going to put it on slides, make videos about it. So
tattoo on your forehead.
Tattoo, whatever you think you need to do, but to really start
people matter to God.
To really figure out what's most important and make sure that you are communicating over. Maybe you need to make little axioms, and there's so many strategies to communicate it, but the first step I think is just to identify what they are and to start putting on paper maybe first, and then figure out how to get it out clearly to your team.
I think that a good one to tattoo would be, we do whatever it takes, right here, and then just pull it up, and you don't finish the statement. We do whatever it takes.
That can go many different directions there.
Anyways.
The next step in that is to force rank them.
I think, too, that sometimes this is one of the things we've been going through as a staff. I think we have 12 or 13 values and really saying what are the top 3 or 4. Patrick Lencioni in his book talks about if you have so many, it's really hard for people to grab a hold of them. So we're going back through, and in the next year, we're gonna fresh a lot of what we've already worked on with our vision and values. And by doing that, we're trying to create a little bit more clarity around what's most important, the top 3 or 4 values. The other key component about the vision and values is where are you heading currently as an organization? When you think about a vision or a mission statement, that's our 30,000-foot view of an organization, why we exist and the big picture, what's it going to look like in 10, 15 years from now. But then you get down to that 15,000-foot view of how do you know a year from now, if we get 12 months down the road, what will have been fruitful, will have been successful. And I think people and teams need some clarity around that. And that allows culture, it shapes culture, it allows people to stay focused and making sure that it's communicated all over the place.
Mm-hmm. The other thing to keep in mind is the way you communicate it changes as you grow. And then what happens often is you're kind of if you get unsure about how to communicate it and you don't make a strategy around it, you're just gonna stop communicating it. And it's kind of what happened to us a little bit. I think the first few years we had it everywhere. Our vision, values, we preached about it. We had leadership gatherings every month because we were small. We printed in flyers. We put it in the hallway. We did all this stuff. When we grew to a certain size, we kind of brainstormed some ways of how do we continue to communicate it, but it wasn't very solid. And so it started to kind of dwindle a little bit and leak the vision. And we're in that conversation again now. For where we are as a church right now, what does it look like for us to clearly communicate vision and values, knowing that now we have 2 campuses and our staff is larger and we have multiple services and it's a little bit different to do it. It's still just as important to figure out how to clearly get it done.
Yep, that's good, man. So clearly communicate your vision and values, number 1. Number 2 is this. It's shape the language of your team. James chapter 3, verses 3 through 6 makes a couple really powerful statements about the power of the tongue. And he says that your words are like a little spark that can light a whole forest on fire. In fact, in California, we've gone through a few droughts over the last couple of years, and you get these forests that are like, you know, all it has to do is be like one more hot day and the whole forest is going on fire. And James is saying you could take one match, you throw it down in there, and that whole you know, acre of land or that whole hill is going to catch on fire. And your words are like that. You can ignite a fire in people for good. You can destroy things for bad. In fact, Felipe lit a fire one time when he was a small kid.
I did.
He has a picture of it. Maybe
I did.
we could insert it into the video to show.
Yeah, it was a one match. We burned the whole stinking field and almost some houses.
Yeah. And so your words have the ability to literally shape and mold the culture of your church. He uses the other statement. He says that it's like a rudder in a ship that changes the course and the direction of an entire ship. So the language of your team, as you look at it and you almost dial in and micromanage to some extent the word choices, the language, it can move you in one direction or the other. It's amazing how many conversations we have about conversations, about how we say things, because it really, your words really do matter. Yeah. So a couple just different categories of things to pay attention to.
Yeah, so one category is the idea of either having gratitude as a topic of conversation and the style of talking, or entitlement. And you've all seen this, like when people feel entitled, you're like, I don't want to be a part of that. When there's gratitude, it's welcoming, you feel like you want to be a part of it, and you need to start identifying, like, what does it look like for us to have a gratitude style culture in our church, and what kind of phrases, what kind of strategies can you have around shaping your culture that direction?
Yeah, being at this place where you feel privileged to be a part of the work of God is so significant. Praising versus complaining is another one. Sometimes you hear people complaining about their job and not doing it and not wanting to do it, versus really having more this praise language. This might be like a faith language where we believe that God can do what only God can do, when we trust in Him, when we use words to talk about His future faithfulness in our lives, versus disparity and worry and anxiety and the ship's going to fall apart, it's not going to work, we're doomsday. So faith and worry is another one. Truth versus a lack of honesty is another one. Why don't you talk about this one? Yeah, since you're so honest all the time.
Oh, thanks, man. But this is the idea that you're going to be very transparent with your team and truthful, and you have to start catching that. Sometimes there's a pressure that we have to be this like type of model and like do everything right, and you can't make mistakes, and there's this like this tendency to start moving into a direction that's just not very honest. You exaggerate numbers, you exaggerate emotion, you exaggerate where you really are. It's out of insecurity, and you have to really pay attention to that. Are we going to have a culture of just telling it like it is and being truthful? But at the same time, the next one is that grace versus judgment and condemnation, which is just as important for us.
Yeah, and just on the comment on the like stretching numbers and stuff, like we've really been doing this since we've been about 15,000 people, so it's really been a part of our culture for a while. So.
Yeah, now that everything's perfect at South Bay Church, it's so easy.
Yeah. Anyways, grace versus judgment and condemnation. Here's another key thing, is like building a culture around what we're for rather than what we're against. And I have a lot of friends who are totally different. Like I have friends that are pastors that have a non kind of traditional view of the Bible. I have friends who are ultra reformed in their theology, and I like them all.
Distant friends. Just kidding.
Yeah. No, close friends, man. Heart connection. We talk about Charles Spurgeon together, and Yeah, anyways, my point I want to make about this is that I think creating a culture that allots, even another example would be like the roles of men and women in ministry. A lot of these subjects that, I mean, let's just be honest. The Bible is not black and white about these things. There's not a prescription for it. So when we judge other ministries, I have friends that are uber charismatic. I have, friends that haven't heard a word from the Lord their entire journey with Jesus. I mean, and I think that flexibility of when we judge other people, we condemn them for being different, or we bring in different examples of leaders and we listen to people who are different than us. It allows us to create more of a grace, gray where the Bible's gray culture, and just paying attention. So those are just some real practical things to evaluate.
Another practical side of shaping language is just how you start and run meetings, right? So like your meetings are where your team is all together and they're watching people like lead pastors and the executive team and whatever else, and how they're going to communicate about how things are going. So the way that we start meetings, the way we finish meetings, is really shapes. A lot of times something went wrong on a weekend, and everyone's kind of sitting like, "Oh my goodness, how's that guy or girl going to respond?" And then when you come in, your first few words really mold everything else. And when you're like, you know what, guys, we're gonna believe God's got great things ahead, and you start with great stories, and you have optimism, but you're still truthful, and you're gracious, but you can address things directly, and you just pay attention to how you run meetings, and there's a sense of gratitude in meetings. Do you spend time thanking God instead of just begging Him, can you fix stuff that's going wrong? And it's all this stuff, like our language is always shaping our culture. So pay attention and lead with an intentional way.
That's great, man.
Okay.
That one you can take to the bank. Shape the language of your team.
Yep.
All right, number 3 is reward healthy culture and refuse to tolerate unhealthy culture. So when you begin to see the expression of your values, you see people who are doing a great job, who are embodying the vision and values, then to do whatever you can as a senior leader to reward it. And then when there's the moments that things are starting to go out of alignment, the thing that I've noticed is that a misalignment in an organization never gets better on its own. And I think sometimes we as leaders want to presume that attitudes will get better. We feel like if we just let it go for a while, people will overcome it, people get better. But the thing is, from my experience, now your experience may be entirely different than mine, but I've seen the enemy takes it the wrong direction if there's not both grace and truth inserted into the situation to bring it back into the ways of Jesus. And so paying attention to, is there an area of your team that's going out of alignment?
Yeah, that's great. Part of this is rewarding the expression of your values. One of the things that we get to do here in Silicon Valley, because of all these companies around, is we visit these tech companies and kind of see some of these things that they are doing. A few months ago, I was walking around Facebook with a couple of our friends, and I noticed on the walls they had all these, it's like their new facility, so everything's brand new, but they had this like spray painted style phrase that says the hacker way. And everywhere you went, there's like the hacker, like it looks like spray painting stuff, and it was like kind of almost out of place. You see it in random walls. And I asked the guys, what is the hacker thing all about? And they said, oh, this is a big deal for us at Facebook. We, our founders and whatever else, it's kind of part of our culture. We don't ever want to forget that we want to have this raw aggression with creating and hacking. And it's kind of like the hacker mentality. We want to be at the front edge of trying new things and being risk takers and being on the edge of whatever is happening. And it's molded their culture. So they write it down, and what happens in their environment is they are all, like, because it's written everywhere, all the, whoever you report to, your boss and your coworkers, there's a reward system around people that are operating this way. So you're not going to be corrected when you do things a little bit out of the ordinary, because it's the hacker way. So it's just evaluating some of those things in our environments. What is it that we do to reward the values that are really, really important to us? If there's no system around that, then they will naturally start to disappear.
Yeah, that's a great term, man.
It is.
Talk about the other one too, about the problems. Every problem is my problem.
Yeah, so I'm walking around their campus, and I said, hey, man, everything looks like everything's operating so well here, and there's not a lot of these little mini problems around, like trash laying around. And I asked one of the guys, like, what are some of the things that you've learned? Like, what do you think shapes that part of your culture? And he said, well, there's a phrase that floats around here. I don't even know if it's written anywhere, but it's just like a phrase that everybody that works at Facebook knows, that any problem is everyone's problem. And I was like, what do you mean? He goes, well, if I am walking around and I see that there's a trash can overflowing, I cannot assume that it's somebody else's problem. I know that I have to go out and take the trash out. If I go and open a door and I realize the lock of the door is broken, I can't just say, oh yeah, somebody else is going to fix that, so I'll just keep going. Like, it is my problem to address it. So every problem is everyone's problem. It's a value for them. And so it's molded their culture in such a way that you walk around and it's like a lot of these little problems that you typically see places, they disappear because everyone's taking ownership for them together. So it's just part of their culture, and it works for them.
Yeah. I think too that sometimes it's a little bit difficult in a church setting to know what are those behaviors or those cultures that you should reward and not tolerate, and trying to pay attention to even the dynamics of working with volunteers. Mm-hmm. Sometimes it's more difficult because you don't want to, here's this guy, he's working all week, he's coming in. Like we had a sound guy that was late to our service this week, and it put everything into chaos. And you're like, well, maybe the guy's working really hard and maybe he needs the extra sleep, but if he's made a commitment to be there, then he still needs to be led like a staff member. And so for us as a church, we have to be very careful to not muddy the waters with having so many volunteers around that we let the culture get weak as a result of our acquiescing to people who are not paid by the church.
Yep, that's great. The other part of this is the things that the senior pastor and your senior leadership give attention to. They are screaming all the time what's most important in our culture. So you want to talk about that?
Yeah, I just think that you have an inordinate ability to shift an entire organization through your leadership. And there's a responsibility with that, and there's a privilege, and there's a beauty to that. And so every problem that we have as a staff ultimately comes back to me as a senior leader. And if I give my attention to the most important things, then it's going to help our entire team be dialed in on the right track. And we have an executive directional level team that really is leading out in major areas. And that team, as it's cohesive and dialed in to the right priorities, then it influences the whole organization. But I want to be careful to make sure I'm strategically giving my attention to what's most important to the entire team. And as I do this, it permeates every department, getting phrases right, getting priorities right, interacting with people in the correct way in such a way that it permeates through the entire team. Mm-hmm. So that's point number 3, is to really dial in specifically to reward healthy culture. So one question to think through is, are there some places in your team where you need to address unhealthy culture, and who are some people or some players that you can begin to reward under healthy culture? So that's point number 3.
All right, number 4 is to elevate and promote people who embody your culture. We talked a little bit about this in the last session that we did, but this is super important because the people you elevate based on culture, they're going to shape your culture tremendously.
Yeah, I think a couple places to really pay attention to this is the stage. Mm-hmm. Who you put on stage really does shape culture. It communicates and screams. And then who's on your staff, what titles you give them really matters in promotion of people. Mm-hmm. Group leaders, team leaders, the people that have microphones, the people that we're giving positional influence. Now, we're not saying that they need to lead positionally, but when we give them positional influence, we want to make sure that they have and embody the culture. And sometimes we can promote people over with competence, over character, over culture, and making sure that we have that part of our DNA correct, that we're in alignment there, is really, really significant and important. So I would just, take some time to go through and look at the different people on your teams and the people that you've empowered as leaders, and asking the question, are they embodying the culture that we want to create? Because what you're going to have is, if you have leaders who don't have your culture, they're going to be pulling it just intuitively pulling it in a direction different than where you believe God's leading the church to go. And that becomes a difficult place to be.
Yeah. The other part to that is when somebody gets your culture, it is so much easier to teach other things. Like skill you can teach and a lot of this other stuff, but sometimes when somebody's really counterculture to what you're trying to develop, it doesn't matter how awesome they are with some skills, it's going to affect you in such a negative way that we usually will regret having them on the team, even though they're a high caliber type of leaders.
Yeah, and the other thing I was thinking about as you were saying that is in some instances where you have somebody that their cultural preferences are different than yours, you're going to spend an inordinate amount of time trying to get alignment around the culture. When, like, I mean, you and I from 18 years old have had similar vision and values for ministry. So think about how little time we have to work through all that. We're working to clarify it, but we're talking about how do we move it forward? How do we make it happen? And it's because there's cohesion there. And just that key component, man, if you could apply that, and I don't mean this arrogantly, but if you could apply that, like, would save you so much heartache.
In hiring too.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. Hiring, promoting on teams, the whole kit and caboodle.
All right. And then lastly, number 5 is this: to create a shared experience or shared experiences that reinforce culture. And this is super important, that it's in a rhythm where it's constantly happening. It's actually the conversation we're having right now this week at South Bay Church, is how do we kind of take that up a notch and having environments where that's being communicated well.
Yeah, and I think about, like, isn't it interesting how sometimes some of the strongest businesses and churches, even at the core, have families that are running those businesses and organizations? And a part of it is because there's been all this relational work that's done up into the point of execution. And I think sometimes we can start to feel like, I got to get work done. I got to make it happen. I got to execute. I got to get done. And I feel like some of the best ideas are coming out of those times where it's not forced, it's not pushed. We're hanging out, we're having fun, we're chatting it up. And kind of dialing it back a little bit can create more. Like yesterday, we did this deal with our staff. We did this balloon, or what's it called? Bubble soccer. Bubble soccer. We did. It was like this 2 hours of just staff competition, and then afterwards we went out to lunch. No agenda, just the beginning of the front end. We just thanked our staff for their faithfulness and just had a blast. But it was good. Even riding back in the car with a couple staff members we hadn't hung out with before, getting to connect and getting to know them a little bit more. Those shared experiences are crucial. The other place where I find this is key is traveling. So I always want to take somebody with me in traveling. The unfortunate side is we have the wrong staff member. I'll stay up till 2 or 3 a.m. talking about ministry. But that shared experience is killer because it's not a forced time that you get to build friendship in. So.
And then think about things like your leadership gatherings, your volunteer celebrations, your staff meetings, your even initiatives that you take on as a church together, your capital campaigns, your missions initiatives. These things are all opportunities to create experiences that shape your culture. So as you're thinking about culture and how to be strategic with it, use what you're already doing and then create new opportunities that they can be communicated really, really clearly to the team. Yeah,
and I think memorializing or just taking time to celebrate big events on the back end are killer. We love Brazilian steak here. So we have a fogo de chão. We've done some of our big, we just launched a campus. Let's take 8 of the key leaders and let's go, stuff our faces until we can't eat any more meat. And it's okay, to do that because there's no carbs involved and and it's fine. I think the Lord blesses it. And so I think that those shared celebrations, even when you do things like you start a new service when you first start and taking 5 or 6 people out who busted it, I kind of have this conviction that whenever I'm with a staff member, I want to try to bless them. I want to pay for their meal. I want to, and it's amazing just that approach, how it creates a different environment of people having all these shared experiences that are way more. Sometimes I think when staff and teams start to feel rigid, it's because we don't have that those connect points around doing work together. And so I think that that's another one you could take to the bank right there.
Yeah, very practical. So some questions to ask yourself, and maybe to sit down with your team in the different departments, or give some homework to some of your teammates or leaders in your environment. There is, how are you communicating vision and values not only to your church but in the teams that people serve in? How are you shaping the language of your teams right now? What do you do to reward people that are embodying the vision and the culture that you hope to have for everybody in your environment? And then elevating and promoting those people that do that, creating shared experiences that help communicate it. So think through some of those things, write it down with your team. I think it'll really benefit you.
Awesome. Till next time, may the Lord bless you and keep you and cause his face to shine upon you. May you be warmed and filled.